Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm AJ with Beer City Woodworking, and today we're going to be making succulent planters. If this is your first time watching this channel, please hit that like button, hit subscribe, and let's get into the video. To begin, we just need to pick out which kind of lumber we want to use for this job. I chose to use Padauk, walnut, and maple. I did throw a slab of cherry on top, but I didn't end up using that. I'll be cutting a 2-inch hole into these planters for the succulent. First thing you want to do is rough cut down your boards. Keep in mind that a board that's less than 8 inches will not go through your planter, so you will have to cut these long. So now we have our pieces picked out, which different colors that we want. Now the fun part is milling these down and figuring out which patterns we want for the planters. The first thing you want to do is use a joiner to clean up your edges. These boards' edges were already cleaned up, so I just ripped them down on the table saw to 3.5 inches. So I found myself in a bit of a predicament. I want to make 3 planters out of this at 3.5 inches a piece, which there is enough here for, but I don't want everyone to be the same. I wanted to do 2 the same, and I wanted to make one a little bit different with some thinner pieces. Luckily I had the scraps left over that I cut off with the table saw. I'm just going to go ahead and cut these in half after milling them, so I'll have other pieces to kind of mess around with and make a different design. So that's why you always keep your scraps. So because these pieces were a little bit thicker than I wanted, I just milled them down to a size that I thought was acceptable. Now that we have our long pieces all milled up, the next thing to do would be to cut them to 3.5 inches, so that way each planter is 3.5 by 3.5. So now I've got the bases for all 3 planters laid out. I'm waiting for my thinner strips of Padauk to dry while those are glued up, and I'm going to have to mill down the maple on the 3rd box. The reason being is because I want them to all stay consistent with each other, and since the first 2 are actually cut out of the same pieces of wood, they're just kind of, the colors are flip-flopped, those are the exact same height. And because the Padauk on the 3rd box is going to be milled down to about 1/4 inch, the first block, which you can see here, is about 1 inch thick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double up the walnut on each side. And once the walnut's doubled up, that means I got to take some space away, because if I add that Padauk in there, it's going to be 1/4 inch taller than the other boards. So I need to mill that maple down 1/4 inch to make sure that all of them stay consistent. So I glued the scraps up together, and what I'm doing is just chiseling off the excess glue before I do the final glue up. So I know this is kind of hodgepodge together. Normally I wouldn't recommend gluing up all these different pieces, but since it's all I had at the time and I didn't want to rough cut down another board and waste a bunch of wood, I think that this will work just fine. Finally, the glue ups are done. I know they can be exhausting and stressful, but it's over. So let's go ahead and unclamp our pieces and move on to the next step. So as you can see, the glue up turned out pretty fine. I always make sure that I keep one edge relatively flush, so that way when I go to trim it up, I can put it right up against that miter fence and make sure that it's cutting at a 90. So now we need to drill our hole where the planter will sit. What we're gonna do is take a square and just go from corner to corner and make an X to mark center. Get your drill press all set up, and then you're just gonna drill right through that mark. Honestly, the best advice I can give about this step, which is using the table saw to cut the geometric patterns, is to just be safe and don't do anything you're not comfortable with. If you're not comfortable setting up your blade on a 45-degree angle, and running pieces like this across its side, then I would definitely recommend to just use a belt sander or any kind of sander that you have. The whole fun of this is just to be creative and have fun with it. Make whatever shapes you want. Some people like to make them perfect, in which case the table saw is really handy, but I like to make them just random and have it be a different pattern every time to truly make it a one-of-one, which you can definitely accomplish using a belt sander. And being safe is always more important than having a job be perfect. With that said, let's get to cutting on the table saw. After I hit them with the orbital, just to get a couple of those burn lines out. You don't want to have burn lines in your wood. Sometimes it's easier to get at that with these weird angles with a hand sand rather than with the orbital. So now all that's left to do is for us to put a clear coat on these and put some succulents in them, and then they are good to go. So for this project, I'm just using a Minwax semi-gloss fast-drying urethane. You can use whatever you have at home. It's always amazing to see how the grain of the wood and the colors just pop after you get that coat on there.
You hear that, Samson? Beautiful.
today's video. If you like this video, again, remember to like and subscribe to the channel. We're gonna have more videos coming your way soon. You can also follow me on Instagram for more tips and tricks. I will have that right here below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.